Dad told horrible lies about me to his new wife and she feared for her kids' safety. So I was sent away to boarding school, but years later, karma hit them bad and they are begging for my help. Hey Reddit, ever been lied about so hard your own dad convinced his new wife you were a danger to her kids and then dumped you at boarding school like last week's trash? Yeah, that happened to me. Fast forward a few years, turns out I wasn't the problem. He was. Always was. And when karma finally showed up, well, ain't spoiling shit. Here's how it all went down. Before I, 20 male, get into the main disaster, let me set the stage about what my childhood was actually like. Mom, Grace, was actually pretty awesome before everything went to hell. She was one of those wives who brought dad a drink while he worked on his car, never complained when he tracked grease through the house, and could make a mean pot roast that had his buddies coming over just for dinner. Woman knew how to handle herself too, could change her own oil, threw a perfect spiral in the backyard, and actually watched the games with him instead of pretending to care. She made our house feel like home, you know? Always had snacks ready when I got back from school, helped with homework without making me feel stupid, remembered which teammates I liked and which ones were jerks. Mom was the type who'd let me stay up late on weekends to finish a game level, but made sure I still got to bed at a reasonable time. She had this way of being cool without being a pushover. But the addiction? Well, it started with pills after a back injury when I was like 8, then escalated to harder stuff. It didn't happen overnight. Before the pills took over, I remember Mom trying to hold it together. She'd still make Dad's favorite meals, pack his lunch for work, do all the wife stuff while barely holding herself upright. One night when I was about 10, she made this incredible lasagna. Spent all day on it, the kind with 3 different cheeses and homemade sauce. Dad rolled in 2 hours late from the garage, didn't even acknowledge the effort. Mom asked him quietly, "Can we talk about spending more time together as a family? Your son misses you." Dad exploded, started screaming about how he worked his ass off to provide for us, how she should be grateful instead of nagging him. Then he grabbed that lasagna and hurled it against the wall. Sauce and cheese everywhere. The casserole dish shattered on the kitchen floor. Mom just stood there watching her hard work dripping down the wall while Dad stormed out to his buddy's place. That was the first time I realized he didn't see her as a person, just background noise that made his life easier. I helped her clean it up while she cried. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor. Dude would work late, go to his buddy's garage on weekends tinkering with his Camaro, basically anywhere that wasn't home dealing with the mess. When he was around, him and Mom would scream at each other until the neighbors called the cops. I spent most nights with headphones on, grinding through Call of Duty lobbies or hiding in my room while they tore each other apart downstairs. Learned to sleep through anything. Sirens, breaking glass, you name it. The only person who actually gave a damn was my Uncle Rick, Mom's younger brother. Rick never liked Dad, thought he was a selfish piece of work from day one. Used to tell Mom she deserved better, but she was head over heels for Dad's bad boy with a motorcycle act. Rick would swing by every weekend, take me to hockey games, or just get me out of the house when things got too intense. Guy taught me how to throw a proper punch, change a tire, and spot when adults were full of crap. He didn't give long speeches or fake smiles, just handed me a soda, told me to grab my jacket, and got me the hell out of there. Mom died when I was 12. Overdose in the bathroom while Dad was at some work conference in Vegas, probably playing blackjack instead of answering her calls. It was a Tuesday. I found her when I got home from school. Had to call 911 myself because Dad's phone went straight to voicemail. Rick showed up before the ambulance did. I'd called him first because I knew he'd actually answer. After the funeral, Dad suddenly wanted to be father of the year. Started asking about my homework, taking me to movies, even tried cooking dinner a few times without burning the house down. But here's the thing about him. He's a master manipulator. In public, at school events, around other parents, he was this grieving widower doing his best to raise his son alone. Teachers loved him. Neighbors thought he was a saint. Behind closed doors? Different story. He'd use Mom's death as leverage. Your mother wouldn't want you acting like this. Or, I'm all you have left, don't push me away too. When I'd get upset about missing her, he'd get this cold look and say stuff like, at least she's not suffering anymore. Or, maybe now we can have some peace. The guilt trips were endless. He'd take me somewhere fun, then spend the whole drive home explaining how much he was sacrificing for me, how other dads wouldn't put up with a difficult kid like me. Made it seem like every good thing he did was this huge favor I should be grateful for. Rick kept coming around, checking in every few days. Dad hated it, said Rick was undermining his authority and filling my head with negative thoughts. Translation: Rick called Dad out on his BS and Dad couldn't handle the truth. But I stayed because where else was I going to go? Dad made sure I knew that foster care was worse, that Rick couldn't legally take me, that running away would only make things harder. Plus, he'd have these moments where he seemed genuinely sorry, where he'd promise to do better. He'd ask about my day, and I'd give him three-word answers because what was the point? Where was this energy when mom was falling apart and I was basically raising myself? Dude missed every single parent-teacher conference for 4 years straight. Too little, too late became my motto for anything involving dear old dad. Fast forward 2 years. Dad drops the news that he's getting remarried to Meredith, this woman he met at some work function. She comes with two kids, Lucy, 8, and Lucas, 10. And from day one, it was clear I was the unwanted stepchild in this Brady Bunch fever dream. Meredith had this entitled suburban princess energy that made my skin crawl. First week living together, she rearranged the entire house without asking Dad or me. My mom's pictures, gone. Her books, donated. The couch mom picked out, replaced with some $3,000 white leather monstrosity her kids weren't allowed to eat on. But somehow I was always the one getting lectured about keeping it clean. Dad was completely different with Meredith, at least at first. Spoiled her rotten, agreed with everything she said, let her make all the decisions about the house and the kids. When she complained about me, he'd nod along and promise to handle it. Guy who used to scream at mom for asking him to spend time with me was suddenly Captain Save-A-Ho when his new wife wanted me gone. He went from life's hard, deal with it, to whatever you want, princess, like he was auditioning for Stepdad of the Year. Meanwhile, I was demoted to background furniture. Rick came by that first weekend after they moved in and nearly lost his mind when he saw what she'd done. "Where are Grace's things?" he asked Dad directly. Dad just mumbled something about making space for the new family. Her kids were complicated. Lucas was straight up demon spawn when she wasn't watching, would steal my stuff and then play innocent when I called him out. Little Psycho once took my custom Xbox controller, the one I'd saved up for months to buy, and hid it, then watched me search for an hour before finding it under my bed. But Lucy was different. She was only 8, caught in the middle of all this adult drama, and I could tell she felt conflicted about the whole situation. Sometimes she'd try to include me in stuff when her mom wasn't around, or apologize quietly when Lucas was being a jerk. Kid had good instincts about people, even if she was too young to fully understand what was happening. Meredith was worse than Lucas, though. Lucas would tell Meredith I said mean things about her mom, completely made up stories that got me grounded from my PlayStation. But Lucy would sometimes stick up for me in small ways, like, I didn't hear him say that, or maybe Lucas misunderstood. But the worst part? Dad ate it up when Meredith complained. She would whisper in his ear about how difficult I was being, how I wasn't adjusting well to the new family dynamic. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong. Stayed in my room too much? I was being antisocial. Hung out in common areas? I was monopolizing the space and making her kids uncomfortable. Dad became this micromanaging nightmare. Had to ask permission to hang out with friends, justify every grade, explain why I needed new cleats when Lucas's feet were growing faster than mine. Meanwhile, Meredith's kids got whatever they wanted. New bikes, gaming systems, trips to Six Flags. I got lectures about being grateful for what I had. The crazy part was watching Dad's public versus private act with the new family. At barbecues or school events, he was this loving stepdad, bragging about Lucas's baseball skills, talking about Lucy's art projects. But at home, when Meredith wasn't paying attention, I'd catch him getting that same cold look he used to give Mom and me. Rick started showing up more often. Could tell something was wrong. Dad would get tense whenever Rick's truck pulled in the driveway. "That man is poison," Meredith would mutter under her breath whenever Rick visited. She had no idea Rick was the only reason I was still sane. Things came to a head during spring break of my freshman year. Meredith had been riding me all week about attitude because I didn't want to participate in their forced family game night. Her kids were cheating at Monopoly, while she pretended not to notice, and I'd had enough. When Lucas tried to steal money from the bank while everyone was distracted, I called him out. Kids started crying like I'd hit him or something. Meredith immediately went into protective mom mode, screaming at me for bullying her precious angel. That's when I snapped. Told her exactly what I thought about her golden children and their thieving ways. Said maybe if she actually parented them instead of letting them run wild, they wouldn't be such little criminals. Might have mentioned that Lucas was already showing signs of being a future insurance fraud case. Lucy looked mortified. Not at me, but at her brother getting caught. She whispered, "Lucas, you know that's not fair." But nobody was listening to an 8-year-old. Dad lost it. Sent me to my room like I was 5, then came up an hour later for the serious talk. Said I was becoming uncontrollable, that my attitude was poisoning the whole household. Meredith was downstairs crying because I'd been so cruel to her and the kids. Maybe boarding school would help you get some perspective, he said. Learn some discipline. Meet kids from good families. I laughed in his face. Good families? Like the one where mom died alone while he was playing poke? But honestly, by that point, I wanted out as bad as they wanted me gone. Living there was like being a background character in someone else's sitcom. Rick found out about the boarding school plan when Dad forgot to invite him to the family meeting about my future. He showed up anyway and laid into Dad like I'd never seen. You're shipping him off because your new wife can't handle a grieving teenager? Grace would be disgusted with you. Dad banned Rick from the house after that fight, said he was a disruptive influence, and Meredith didn't feel comfortable with him around her children. Meredith backed him up completely. At the time, the boarding school wasn't terrible. Think less Dead Poets Society, more like a really expensive summer camp you can't leave. Had this roommate Ian, who became my brother from another mother. Kid was from Chicago, parents divorced, similar situation of being shipped off when the new family arrangements got complicated. The first month was rough though. Kept expecting Dad to change his mind, drive up and take me home. When visiting day rolled around and every other kid had parents showing up with care packages and fake smiles, I sat in my dorm room playing FIFA while Ian pretended he wasn't watching me fall apart. His parents couldn't make it either. Some business trip that was more important than their kid. But we figured it out. Started our own little family with the other kids who'd been dumped there by parents who couldn't deal. There was Jake, whose stepmom decided he was too much work, and Chris, whose dad remarried a woman who demanded he choose between his son and his new marriage. Guess which one he picked? Made the lacrosse team, pulled decent grades, even had a girlfriend junior year, Sarah from the girls' school down the road. Life was actually pretty good when I wasn't thinking about home. Ian and I would sneak out to hit golf balls at the driving range behind campus, smoke the occasional joint behind the equipment shed. Normal teenage stuff. The lacrosse team became my real family. Coach Miller was this ex-Marine who actually gave a damn about us as people, not just players. Guy would stay after practice to help kids with homework, drive us to weekend games when parents couldn't be bothered, even took a few of us camping during spring break when we had nowhere else to go. First male authority figure in years who kept his word when he said he'd show up. Rick drove 3 hours every other weekend to visit me, brought care packages, took me out for real food instead of cafeteria slop, listened to me vent about Dad's increasingly rare phone calls. Dad hated that Rick stayed in touch, tried to get the school to limit my visitors but couldn't, since Rick was listed as emergency contact. Here's the thing though, every holiday when I'd come back, it was like visiting strangers. Meredith had completely redecorated my room while I was gone. Pink walls, floral bedding, turned it into a guest room with motivational quotes on the walls. When I asked where my stuff was, she said she thought I'd outgrown those things and donated most of it. My gaming setup? Gone. My sports trophies? Taking up too much space. Lucy would sometimes sneak into my temporary room and apologize for the changes. I tried to save some of your stuff, she'd whisper, but Mom said it was clutter. Kid was developing her own rebellious streak. The final straw was Thanksgiving junior year, sitting around their perfect table with their perfect family photos on the walls, none of which included me. Lucas mentions this camping trip they took over Columbus Day weekend, some father-son bonding thing where they went fishing, and Dad taught him to drive stick. Dad never told me about it, never invited me, didn't even mention it when I called that weekend. That's when I realized I wasn't part of this family. I was just some obligation Dad was managing until I turned 18, like a car payment that would eventually end. Rick called that night and could hear something was wrong in my voice. You always got a place with me, kid. Your dad might have forgotten who the family is, but I haven't. Now plot twist time. Dad decided I can't go back to boarding school for senior year because apparently it was making me entitled and disconnected from reality. Translation. Money got tight after Meredith's shopping addiction and Lucas's travel baseball team expenses. Those tournament fees hit differently when you're financing a kid's dreams of playing Division III ball somewhere. So now I'm stuck at home full-time, transferred to the local public school, watching this family dynamic up close again. And something was off. Meredith started acting human. Not fake nice, but actually interested in my life, asked about my classes, made my favorite dinner without being asked, even came to a few lacrosse games. The shift was subtle but real. She'd make jokes during dinner, include me in conversations, stop treating me like I was radioactive. Her kids started warming up too, which was weird because they'd been trained to see me as the enemy for years. Lucas even asked if I could help him with his batting stance. But what really got my attention was watching her interact with Dad. The honeymoon phase was definitely over. She'd ask him to help Lucy with math homework, and he'd grunt something about being tired from work. Same energy he used to give Mom when she needed support. Meredith would suggest family movie nights, and Dad would suddenly remember urgent garage projects that couldn't wait. I started timing his excuses. Guy was averaging 3 emergencies per week that required him to disappear for hours. Meredith noticed too, caught her watching the clock when he'd promised to be back by dinner, then rolling her eyes when he'd text about getting held up. Lucy was warming up to me more now that she was older and could understand the situation better. Started asking me about boarding school, about what other kids were like, if I had friends there. She'd sit next to me during movie nights instead of glued to her mom's side. But here's where it gets interesting. One night in February, I heard them fighting downstairs. Not unusual, but this time it was about me. Meredith was defending me about something, telling Dad he was being too harsh about my curfew. He was getting nasty with her. "Don't tell me how to handle my kid," he snarled. "You wanted this family, now deal with it." Rick had been telling me for months that something didn't add up. "That woman's not stupid," he'd say. "She's figuring out what your dad really is." That's when I knew something had changed. And it wasn't just Meredith being nice. The whole house of cards came crashing down in March. I was upstairs supposedly doing calculus homework, but actually watching YouTube videos about car modifications when I heard voices getting heated downstairs. Couldn't resist. Crept to the top of the stairs like I was 12 again. Meredith was absolutely destroying Dad. Turns out, when they first got together, he'd painted me as some kind of teenage sociopath, told her I was manipulative, dishonest, had anger issues, couldn't be trusted around her kids. Said I'd gotten into fights at school, that I was jealous of her children and would try to turn them against her. Claimed I'd even threatened to hurt Lucas once. "You made me afraid of a grieving child," she was screaming. "You convinced me that a 14-year-old who just lost his mother was dangerous. I spent 4 years watching that kid like he was going to snap and hurt my babies because you told me he was unstable. You did the same thing to Grace, didn't you? Made her think she was the problem while you checked out completely. Now you're doing it to me." Dad was trying to backtrack, saying he was just being protective, that I was going through a difficult phase. But Meredith wasn't buying it anymore. She'd been watching how he treated me, the constant nitpicking, the way he'd dismiss everything I said, how he never showed up to any of my games despite promising he would. "He's been nothing but respectful to me and the kids once I stopped treating him like a threat," Meredith continued. "Meanwhile, you haven't asked about his college plans once. Do you even know what schools he's applying to? And now you're starting the same crap with me that Lucy told me about." Lucy had been talking to her mom about what she observed. "Smart kid. You spoiled me and enabled me to be awful to him because it kept the heat off you," Meredith continued. "But the second he left, you started treating me like garbage, just like you did with Grace when she asked for basic human decency." Silence from Dad. Because of course he didn't know about my college plans, and of course he was repeating the same cycle. The divorce papers were filed 3 days later. Dad fought everything. Spousal support, custody schedules, even tried to claim Meredith was mentally unstable for suddenly bonding with a stepchild she'd previously had issues with. His lawyer painted her as manipulative, said she was using me to get back at him. Meredith's attorney was a shark, came prepared with documentation of Dad's emotional abuse, testimony from my school counselors about my mental state during the boarding school years, even got my lacrosse coach to testify about Dad's complete absence from my life. Coach Miller didn't hold back, said in 4 years of me playing varsity, Dad had shown up to exactly 0 games, despite living 20 minutes away. Rick testified too. Judge asked him about Dad's relationship with me, and Rick didn't sugarcoat anything. Told them about Dad missing Mom's funeral preparations to play poker, about him banning Rick from seeing me, about how Dad had basically checked out as a parent years before the remarriage. The custody fight over Lucy and Lucas was nasty. Dad tried to argue he should get more time because he could provide stability, meaning his house, his rules, no confusion about family hierarchy. Meredith's lawyer destroyed that argument by pointing out he'd shipped his own son off to boarding school the second he became inconvenient. Lucy even asked the judge if she could say something. 12 years old now, standing up in court, telling the judge that Dad had 2 different personalities, one for public and one for private. Kid had been paying attention to everything. When the divorce was finalized, Dad made the assumption that I'd obviously stay with him. After all, he's my real family, right? Blood relation trumps everything in his twisted logic. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen, him making his sad bachelor dinner of microwaved leftovers and a drink, before dropping the news. "I'm moving in with Rick," I said, no sugarcoating. He dropped his fork. "What did you just say?" "You heard me. I'm 18, I can live wherever I want, and I want to live with Uncle Rick. That's when he lost it completely. Started screaming about betrayal, about choosing Rick over blood family. Said I was just trying to hurt him, that Rick had been poisoning me against him for years. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Guy who'd spent zero effort trying to understand what I actually needed was suddenly devastated that I didn't want to stick around for more of the same treatment. Rick's my uncle, I shot back. But he's been more of a father to me than you ever were. Where were you when Mom was dying? Where were you when I needed rides to practice? Rick showed up. You didn't. I was working to provide for this family. You were running away from this family. He got in my face then, something he'd never done before. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. That man has filled your head with lies about me. What lies? I said. That you missed Mom's last doctor's appointment to play golf? That you forgot my birthday 3 years in a row? Or that you banned him from visiting me because he called you out on your crap? Which part was the lie, Dad? He opened his mouth to answer but couldn't. Guy had been to exactly one parent-teacher conference in 6 years, and that was only because the school threatened to hold me back if a parent didn't show up. The silence stretched until he finally said, "If you walk out that door, don't come crying to me when you are rotting alone just like your mother." I just glared at him for a moment, then started packing my stuff. That's when his whole family came out of the woodwork like roaches when you turn on the lights. Grandparents called me ungrateful and selfish. Dad's brother sent this long email about family loyalty and honoring your father. Dude owns 3 dealerships and hadn't talked to me since I was 10, but suddenly he's got opinions about my life choices. But the worst was Aunt Jessica, Dad's younger sister. This woman had always been a piece of work, the type who posts inspirational quotes on Facebook while talking trash about everyone behind their backs. She decided to call me directly. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become," she said right off the bat. No hello, no how are you, straight to character assassination. Excuse me? Running off with her loser brother instead of supporting your father. Grace may have had her problems, but at least she understood family loyalty. That's where she made her mistake. Bringing up my dead mom? Game over. Let me get this straight, I said. You want to lecture me about Mom? The woman you called a junkie behind Dad's back? The one you said was dragging the family down at a Christmas dinner? That mom? Silence. You never visited when she was sick? Never called to check on her. Hell, you didn't even send flowers to her funeral. But now you want to invoke her memory to guilt me into staying with the man who abandoned both of us? That's not fair. You know what's not fair. Having family members who only show up to judge your choices but were nowhere to be found when you actually needed them. Mom died alone while your brother was gambling in Vegas. So maybe save the family loyalty speech for someone who didn't live through your version of support. I hung up and blocked her number immediately, then blocked the rest of them too. If they wanted to play the guilt game, they could do it without me. Meanwhile, living with Rick has been exactly what I needed. Guy's got a solid house, works as a mechanic, and owns his own shop. Taught me how to rebuild an engine, fix my own car, handle myself in a fight if it comes to that. We watch hockey games and terrible action movies, normal uncle-nephew stuff that should have been happening all along. We've got this thing where we work on his old Mustang every Sunday. Just us and classic rock on the radio. Last week, he let me drive it around the block. First time anyone's trusted me with something that actually mattered to them. Meredith reached out a few weeks after I moved in with Rick. Apologized for everything. For believing Dad's lies. For making my life hell. For not seeing through his manipulation sooner. I told her I forgave her because she was a victim too. Just took her longer to figure it out. Lucy sends me messages all the time now, asking when I'm coming to visit, telling me about school, sharing memes she thinks are funny. Lucas is even starting to come around, sent me a video of him practicing the batting stance I taught him. Maybe someday we can have a real relationship, but right now I need space from that whole situation. Dad still sent pathetic texts when he was drinking. Usually something about how I'm ungrateful little shit, or how I'll regret this decision. Sometimes he tries to bribe me back with offers to buy me a car or pay for college. I don't respond anymore because actions speak louder than words. And his actions told me everything I needed to know years ago. The extended family kept trying different tactics. Cousin messages, family friend interventions, even got the pastor from their church to reach out. But here's the thing. They're all trying to guilt me into going back to a situation that was toxic for everyone involved. Rick wanted to understand who I really was, not the version Dad was selling. He put in the work to build an actual relationship over years, not months. He makes me feel like I matter for the first time since Mom died. Plus, he actually shows up when he says he will. Novel concept, right? Thought that was the end of it. Life was good, college applications were going well, Rick was teaching me how to weld, and I was finally sleeping through the night without grinding my teeth. Then life decided to throw one more twist my way. Fast forward about a year. I'm settled into college, doing well in my classes, even made the club lacrosse team. Rick comes to most of my games, which still feels weird in a good way. Life's been pretty solid. The college thing was interesting. The first time I'd been around kids who actually had functional families. Made some decent friends too. Guys who didn't have daddy issues or stepmom drama, just regular college problems like picking a major and figuring out what to do after graduation. It was refreshing being around people who didn't need to hear your whole sob story to understand why you're the way you are. Rick would drive up for Parents' Weekend, wearing his cleanest work shirt and trying not to look out of place among all the lawyers and doctors. But my teammates loved him. Guy who could actually fix things and knew about engines and motorcycles. Some of these kids had never seen an adult work with their hands before. Then one day, Rick shows up at my dorm with this look on his face. Not sad exactly, more like he'd been chewing on something bitter for a while. Got something for you, he says, pulling out an envelope. From your dad. I almost told him to throw it away right there. Hadn't heard from the old man in months. Figured he'd finally gotten the message. But something about Rick's expression made me take it. The letter was handwritten, which was already weird because Dad usually just sent drunk texts. His handwriting looked shaky, not like the confident scrawl I remembered from birthday cards when I was little. He was dying. Cancer, stage 4, doctors giving him maybe 6 months. Been fighting it alone for 8 months already. Didn't want to burden anyone with the news. Classic dad move, make his problems everyone else's fault while playing the martyr. But here's the thing that got me. The letter wasn't asking for money or trying to guilt trip me into coming home. It was just honest. Said he knew he'd screwed up everything that mattered, that he'd been a terrible father and an even worse husband. Admitted he'd lied about me to Meredith, that he'd abandoned Mom when she needed him most, that he'd chosen his own comfort over his family every single time. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took me dying to figure that out. Rick didn't push me either way. Just said, your call, kid. Whatever you decide, I got your back. Took me 3 weeks to make up my mind. Not for his sake, but for mine. So I drove down there on a Saturday. Place looked like hell. Yard overgrown, paint peeling, like the house was dying along with him. Guy who used to obsess over his lawn couldn't even be bothered to hire someone to cut the grass. Dad answered the door looking like a ghost of himself. Lost maybe 60 pounds, skin gray and hanging loose, but his eyes were different. We sat in his living room, still had that stupid white couch Meredith picked out, now stained and falling apart. Neither of us said anything for the longest time. You look good, he finally said. College treating you well? Rick told you I was in college. Yeah, he did. Dad nodded slowly. Good man, Rick. That's when he started talking. Really talking. Not the rehearsed dad speech bullshit I was used to. Told me about the diagnosis, how he'd been going to chemo alone, how Meredith and the kids had cut contact after the divorce got nasty, how his family, the same ones who'd called me ungrateful, had basically vanished when he actually needed them. Funny thing about dying, he said, trying to smile but failing. Really puts things in perspective. All those nights I spent at the garage instead of helping your mom. All those games I missed because work was more important. Sending you away because it was easier than dealing with my own guilt. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in years. You know what the worst part is? I convinced myself I was protecting you. From your mom's addiction. From instability. From having to see me fall apart. But I was just protecting myself from having to be a real father. The apology that followed wasn't the dramatic movie scene you'd expect. It was quiet. Broken. Real. He owned everything. The lies about me, abandoning Mom, choosing Meredith's comfort over his own kids' well-being. Said he'd been jealous of Rick for being the man he was too scared to be. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, he said. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know that none of it was your fault. You were a good kid who deserved better than the father you got. For a minute, I felt something crack inside my chest. For once, he looked like the guy I used to pretend he was when teachers asked why he didn't show. But then I remembered Mom's funeral. How he'd stood there dry-eyed while I sobbed. How he'd gone back to work the next day like nothing happened. How he'd spent her last months in Vegas while she died alone in a bathroom. I stood up. I appreciate the apology, I said, keeping my voice level. And I'm not happy you're dying. Nobody deserves that. He nodded, probably thinking this was the reconciliation scene where we hug it out. I do forgive you, I continued. But not for you, for me. So I can sleep peacefully knowing I'm nothing like you. His face started to change, hope creeping in around the edges. But Dad, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Remember when mom was dying and you were in Vegas? How she spent her last days calling your phone while you ignored her because everything else was more important? He went paler than he already was. You made your choice back then. Now I'm making mine. And honestly, you can rot alone, just like mom did. I walked out and didn't look back. Heard him calling my name through the door, apologizing and crying, but I was already in my car. The drive back was quiet. Didn't feel guilty, which is odd. Rick called that night. How'd it go? Exactly how it should be, I said. Dad died 4 months later. His sister Jessica called to tell me about the funeral arrangements, expecting me to drop everything and come pay my respects. The same woman who'd called me ungrateful was now sobbing about how Dad had been asking for me at the end. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Oh, I had a mechanical engineering exam that day. And guess what? I didn't go to the funeral.